The Colombian conflict, a long-term armed conflict beginning in 1964 with the creation of the FARC and ELN. An issue showing that earlier peace attempts failed, especially the 1999 to 2002 Pastrana peace process, when the FARC used a demilitarized zone to hold hostages, train fighters, and plan operations. That failure deepened distrust and helped intensify later violence. Throughout their work, you can see different drawing and pictures related to the topic. The way these were organized represent meaningful things. First of all, the order. If you walk through our arc, you'll notice how the drawing begins as a generalization of the conflict, depicting the main issue along representations of political, social, and economic factors. Along the sides, there are pictures of soldiers and stuff that reminds the viewer of violence and dark times for the affected region. After that, you'll find some key actors within the topic that work towards making peace possible. The images at the side represented visually and with clear examples of the process. The end is about actually reaching peace and ending violence.
Another important thing to take into account is the placement of drawings against pictures. All the drawings are in the center and they're colorful, while all the pictures are in the edges in black and white, also showing more of what was really going on than the simple drawn explanation. This is an attempt to represent how information is provided to everyone these days. What the media and influential sources say is colorful and simplified. All the while, the information is tainted with darkness and reality, often overlooked, which is why the pictures are facing the outside, representing that it's harder to get the real information. Lastly, we'll look at the drawings and pictures themselves along the situation. The FARC was the principal rebel group. Its grievances centered on land concentration, rural exclusion, and what it described as a non-democratic state. The ELN appears as another major guerrilla group founded in 1964. It matters as part of the broader conflict landscape. Civilians were not passive observers. They were among the main stakeholders because they endured kidnappings, massacres, bombings, displacement, and political violence. Victims groups later became central to the peace process, especially in debates over truth, justice, reparations, and non-repetition. Women's organizations and social movements also pushed for inclusion and accountability. Direct violence is the easiest to identify. It includes kidnappings, massacres, bombings, attacks on civilian settlements, and more. Examples include the thousands of kidnappings per year, the hundreds of attacks on civilian settlements, massacres carried out mainly by paramilitaries, and later bombings and attacks by the FARC. Structural violence appears in the unequal social and economic structures that harm people without always requiring immediate physical attack. It clearly shows, for example, extreme land concentration, rural poverty, dispossession of land, and forced displacement. These structures systematically disadvantaged rural populations and made violence more likely. Cultural violence is visible in the ideas and narratives that help justify the conflict. We can see, for example, the government's framing of the conflict as a war on terrorism and drug trafficking, and the stigmatization of opposition movements, shown by the fear of another patriotic union-style extermination. These beliefs and narratives help legitimize direct and structural violence on all sides. We'll follow by analyzing the political, social, and economic factors. A major political cause was exclusion and weak democratic legitimacy. The FARC viewed Colombia as a non-democratic political system marked by state terrorism and demanded a democratic opening, not only electoral reform but broader participation for social movements. It highlights the importance of protection for opposition groups, especially because of the earlier extermination of the Patriotic Union, which reinforced fears that left-wing political participation could be met with violence. The conflict was also driven by social inequality and victimization. Rural communities were especially affected by displacement, insecurity, and the absence of effective state protection. We're repeatedly shown how civilians suffered through kidnappings, massacres, attacks on settlements, forced displacement, and the broader social fragmentation produced by war. It also emphasizes that women's groups, victims groups, and marginalized communities were later central because the conflict had deeply damaged the social fabric. The clearest economic cause is land inequality. It says extremely unequal land ownership was both a cause and a consequence of the conflict. Rural poverty was much higher than urban poverty. In 2014, multidimensional poverty was 45% in rural areas compared to 21% nationally. On top of that, illicit drugs became a major economic driver of conflict, financing armed actors, including the FARC. The transition toward peace in Colombia was shaped by a sequence of events that gradually reduced violence and opened space for long-term stability. After years of military pressure weakened the FARC, formal negotiations began in 2012 under President Juan Manuel Santos in Havana. These talks addressed not only the end of the conflict, but also its root causes through a six-point agenda. In 2016, the final peace agreement was signed. Although initially rejected in a plebiscite, it was later revised and approved. The Colombian peace process involved a wide range of actors at national and international levels. The main parties were the Colombian government and the FARC, led by Rodrigo Londoño. International actors played a crucial role. Cuba and Norway acted as guarantors, while the United Nations monitored the ceasefire and disarmament process. Additionally, civil groups, especially victim groups, NGOs, and women's organizations, had a direct influence on the negotiations, making the process more inclusive.
Colombia implemented a combination of strategies aimed at both ending violence and addressing its structural causes. The DDR process, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, enabled thousands of combatants to lay down arms under UN supervision and begin reintegration into civilian life. At the same time, a transitional justice system was created, including the GEP, the Truth Commission, and mechanisms for reparations, prioritizing truth and reconciliation over punishment. Structural reforms such as rural development, political participation, and drug cop substitution were also introduced. These strategies show that the process aimed not only to stop the war, but to transform the conditions that caused it.
The peace process ended the largest and longest-running conflict with the FARC, significantly reducing levels of violence. The disarmament process was largely successful, and the creation of institutions like the JEP and the Truth Commission demonstrated a strong commitment to justice and reconciliation. Additionally, the inclusion of victims and gender perspectives made the process innovative at a global level.
So many people in this scenario suffer. It was only through building peace after years of hard work that suffering relented. This case highlights the importance of peace building in the global political context in which it exists. Thank you.